Imagine stepping onto a plane, full of excitement for the journey ahead, only to be told without words that you don't belong. A young black boy, dressed neatly with his boarding pass in hand, stood quietly as a white woman slid into the seat that was clearly his. She didn't ask. She didn't check. She simply took it, as if entitlement gave her permission. Passengers glanced, some with discomfort, others with silent approval. The boy's face carried both confusion and quiet pain, because this wasn't the first time he had felt invisible. What she didn't know, what nobody on that plane knew, was that this boy wasn't just another passenger. He was the son of the very man who owned the airline, and this moment, this small act of arrogance was about to set in motion a lesson no one on board would ever forget. Because sometimes, the most powerful truths arrive not in thunder but in silence, patience, and revelation. The airport buzzed, with its usual orchestra of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and distant announcements echoing across polished halls. Travelers of every background flowed through the terminal, yet within that crowd, one boy carried himself differently. He was young, no more than 12, but there was a quiet dignity in his presence. Dressed in a crisp shirt with shoes shined to perfection, he walked alongside a flight attendant who smiled warmly at him. To anyone paying attention, it was clear. This was no ordinary passenger. But strangers rarely look beyond their assumptions. To many eyes, he was simply a black child traveling alone, perhaps on his way to visit relatives, perhaps too young to understand the world's unspoken rules. And it was within those assumptions that prejudice would soon find its stage. The flight had been fully booked, every seat accounted for, every passenger eager to settle into their journey. Boarding was smooth, until the moment came when the boy reached his row. There it was, his assigned seat printed clearly on his ticket. But already occupying it sat a woman in her late 40s, dressed in expensive travel clothes, clutching her handbag with the air of someone who believed she was above being questioned. Without hesitation, she had placed herself there, ignoring the number above her head, ignoring the young boy who stood quietly by. Her expression carried that familiar blend of defiance and indifference, the silent message of, "Who will stop me?" Nearby passengers noticed. Some raised eyebrows, others whispered, but no one spoke up. No one wanted to challenge her, no one wanted to make a scene. And so the silence became complicit. The boy looked down at his boarding pass again, his lips pressed into a thin line. He knew the seat was his. He knew he had every right to sit there. Yet he also knew the weight of eyes that judged him unfairly, the sting of moments when respect was denied before he could even ask for it. What neither the woman, nor the silent passengers, nor even the flight attendants bustling nearby realized was that this boy's silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. And patience, when placed in the hands of those born into struggle, often blooms into power far greater than anyone expects. Because this wasn't just about a seat. This was about dignity, about respect, and soon it would become about justice. The boy stood silently, clutching his ticket, as the white woman adjusted herself more comfortably into the seat that wasn't hers. She placed her handbag on the empty spot beside her, as if to create a barrier, a clear statement. This space is mine now, and there is nothing you can do about it. The flight attendants, moving briskly to help passengers stow bags and find their places, barely noticed at first. In the rush of boarding, one small injustice was easy to overlook. And that was the danger. It wasn't always loud acts of hatred that cut deepest. Sometimes it was the subtle ones, the ones cloaked in entitlement, that left wounds unseen, but lasting. The boy didn't speak. His eyes scanned the ticket again, then the seat number, then the woman who refused to acknowledge him. It was as if she had erased him entirely. To her, he was invisible. Around him, whispers began to ripple. A man across the aisle frowned, his lips pressing into a thin line, but he turned away, choosing silence over discomfort. A young couple a few rows back nudged each other, their eyes fixed on the scene, waiting to see what would unfold. And then, there were others, the ones who smirked knowingly, almost approvingly, as if this was the natural order of things. Minutes passed, but for the boy, each second stretched into an eternity. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing on him, the silent question hanging in the air. Would he challenge her? Would he cause a scene? Would he dare? Finally, a flight attendant noticed the hesitation, the way the boy stood frozen in the aisle. She leaned down, offering a kind smile, asking softly if he needed help. He handed her the boarding pass with careful hands. Her eyes flicked from the pass to the seat, then to the woman seated stubbornly in it. At once, her posture stiffened. The attendant spoke politely, explaining that the boy was assigned to that seat. But the woman barely glanced up. With a dismissive wave of her manicured hand, she muttered that she wasn't moving, that it was just a mix-up, and she was comfortable where she was. The words were casual, but the tone was cutting. It was the kind of tone that assumed authority, that relied on the belief others would bend rather than confront. The attendant tried again, a bit firmer this time. Still, the woman held her ground, her voice rising just enough for nearby passengers to hear. She claimed she had paid for this seat, that she had every right to be there. The lie was bold but delivered with such confidence that it momentarily clouded the air with doubt. The boy stood still, his face unreadable. Inside, though, a storm churned. He had learned long ago that to fight back too quickly was to risk being labeled aggressive, that to raise his voice even in truth was to invite suspicion. So instead, he let the moment breathe. He let the injustice reveal itself for what it was, unmasked and undeniable. The cabin grew tense. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A child whispered to her mother, asking why the lady wouldn't get up. The mother hushed her quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. And in that silence, something powerful began to form. Not in the woman's smug defiance, but in the growing discomfort of those around her. People were beginning to see. They were beginning to feel. And the longer she refused, the sharper the contrast became between the boy's quiet dignity and her loud entitlement. What no one knew was that the story was far from over. For while she clung to a seat that wasn't hers, convinced she had won some unspoken battle, she had unknowingly stepped into a lesson that would reach far beyond this flight. Because the truth about the boy, about who he was and whose name he carried, was about to change everything. The plane doors closed, the engines hummed to life, and the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. But row 12 remained a stage of quiet unrest. The white woman leaned back smugly, adjusting her travel pillow as if the conflict had ended in her favor. The boy sat silently a few rows away, placed there temporarily while the crew sorted things out. His eyes remained steady, not broken, not defeated, just waiting. As the plane began to taxi, the flight purser arrived, a senior attendant, with an air of authority. She held the boy's ticket in her hand, her brows furrowed. She approached the woman with calm professionalism, asking her once more to show her own boarding pass. The woman, with a sigh that dripped with annoyance, reached into her designer purse and pulled out her slip. She handed it over without a second, thought certain she could talk her way out of anything. But when the purser compared the two tickets, her eyes narrowed. The truth was undeniable. The seat the woman occupied was never hers. Still, she refused to move. She raised her voice now, drawing the attention of the entire cabin. She claimed she deserved to be there, that the boy could sit anywhere else, that it wasn't such a big deal. Her words cut through the hum of the engines, sharp and entitled, filling the air with a tension that passengers could no longer ignore. And then, in that rising storm, the moment came. The captain himself emerged from the cockpit. The sight was unusual enough to hush the cabin instantly. Tall, composed, and dressed in his crisp uniform, he walked with quiet authority. His gaze didn't fall on the woman first. It fell on the boy. And the boy, upon seeing him, finally allowed the smallest smile to break across his face. Whispers rippled through the rows. Passengers exchanged puzzled glances. Why would the captain address a child before dealing with the disruption? But then, with a respectful nod, the captain placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder and said words that would turn the entire flight upside down. This wasn't just a passenger. This was his passenger, his responsibility, his family. Because the boy was the son of the airline's owner, the very man whose name was printed on every plane, every ticket, every gate sign in the terminal. Gasps filled the cabin. The woman's face drained of color. For the first time since she boarded, her confidence wavered. She stammered, trying to find an excuse, but there was none left to give. Her entitlement had been exposed for what it was: empty, baseless, cruel. The captain turned to her then, his voice steady, not loud, but firm enough to silence the entire row. Passengers leaned forward, holding their breath, as justice unfolded. In real time, the woman had taken more than just a seat. She had tried to strip away dignity, to reduce a child to invisibility. But now she sat under the weight of her own arrogance, facing not just the boy she dismissed, but an entire plane of witnesses who had seen her unmasked. And the boy? He didn't gloat. He didn't glare. He simply sat back in his rightful place, his quiet strength speaking louder than any outburst ever could. For in that moment the power had shifted, not through anger, not through force, but through truth. And truth, once revealed, cannot be undone. The cabin was silent in the aftermath, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air like a heavy curtain. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, replaying the scene in their minds, realizing how easily they had let it unfold without stepping in. The woman who had stolen the boy's seat sat frozen, her earlier smugness now replaced with a kind of shrinking shame. She avoided the stares, but she could feel them burning into her. Dozens of eyes that had once looked away, now holding her accountable in silence. The boy, though, didn't let his gaze linger on her. He simply returned to his rightful seat, calm, composed, as though the confrontation had never been about winning. For him, it was about something larger, something deeper. It was about dignity, about the quiet insistence that his place, his worth, could not be erased by arrogance. The flight resumed, but the energy on board had shifted. Conversations were hushed, thoughtful. Parents glanced at their children, perhaps seeing in that boy a reflection of the lessons they still needed to teach, about kindness, about fairness, about the quiet strength it takes to endure when the world tries to push you aside. And yet, for all the shame that woman now carried, the true story was not about her. It was about the boy and what he represented. Too often, young black children are told in subtle ways that they are less deserving, that their presence is negotiable, that their voices can be ignored. And too often the world stays silent, letting entitlement and prejudice take the seat that doesn't belong to them. But here, on this flight, truth had broken through. Here, entitlement had collided with reality and been stripped bare. And the boy's quiet patience had become more powerful than any raised voice, more lasting than any argument. As the plane soared above the clouds, passengers found themselves reflecting not just on what they had witnessed, but on the choices they had made. Some had looked away, some had whispered, some had even smirked. And all of them, in their own way, had become part of the scene. That's the truth about injustice. It doesn't need a crowd to cheer it on. It survives on silence, on hesitation, on the hope that someone else will intervene. But when truth is finally revealed, silence becomes guilt, and guilt becomes a mirror no one wants to face. So what will you do the next time you see dignity denied? Will you sit in silence, or will you take a stand? Because the lesson of that flight is not just about one boy or one woman or one stolen seat. It is about all of us, about the world we build each time we choose to speak or choose to turn away. The boy walked off that plane with his head held high, not because he was the son of an airline owner, but because he carried something far greater, unshakable dignity. A dignity no one could take away, no matter how hard they tried. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson the world needed most.